everybody to tonight's training session. This is an introduction to an on-site training event that's going to happen on the 15th. But hopefully, if you can't make that, you'll still find this useful as an introduction to identifying the many shrubs that you'll find in a hedge, but also understanding a little bit about how they're managed and how to survey them, particularly with biodiversity in mind. The course we're running tonight on hedges is one of a series of 4 that we're doing, which are supported by the County Council related to their Verge Biodiversity project. So we have Rosanna Burton from the County Council with us, and she's just going to say a few words of introduction. So I'll hand over to you, Rosanna.
Thanks for that, David. So welcome everybody to this interactive session tonight. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rosanna Burton and I'm the Environmental Partnerships Officer on behalf of Leicestershire County Council. So the reason for this fantastic partnership and all these great workshops is to really build on all the momentum of the Urban Verge Biodiversity project that we've been working on, to really get the community and volunteers more actively involved in order to help upskill you, to help you understand why we're doing the project and to get a much better overview of some of the wildflowers and grasses, how you can identify them, how you can record them, and how you can play your part in hopefully enhancing these verges for wildlife. So as David's kindly mentioned, it's part of a series and we really hope you get the most out of these courses. We did get a demand of people saying they'd like to have more engaging sessions, really giving them the skills so that they can go out on their own time and get more actively involved with recording and playing a part in local action for nature. So we hope you enjoy it and any questions, and we look forward to seeing you at some of the sessions over the upcoming months. All right, thanks very much to David and Russell as well. I'll hand back over for now.
Thanks, Rosanna. Well, we are really lucky tonight to have Russell Parry with us. Russell is one of the 3 county recorders for flora, and no better person to give us a guide through how to identify the shrubs that you find in Leicestershire hedgerows. So over to you, Russell. You need to unmute, Russell.
Standard unmute. You'll all be used to it, everyone who's watching.
Yeah.
Okay. So how is that? Can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Brilliant. Right. So this is very specifically about how to try to help you be sure that you've got a definite species, that you can confidently name and recognize. We're talking about the woody species that form the hedge, shrubs, trees, and then also there will be a small section on the other species which are an integral part of hedges, those things which grow up amongst the woody species. So I'll start with the actual woody species, the bushes and the trees that form our Leicestershire hedgerows. Hello. Good. And I'm going to start with species of bush or tree which have pinnate leaves. I'm starting there because it's very simple. There are only 2 that you need to know about. This is the first one. But first of all, I'm just going to talk to you about what I mean by pinnate, just in case that's not quite clear. On this plant, this structure, which looks possibly like it might be 5 leaves, that is actually 1 leaf. It grows from the stem and it finishes with what we call a leaflet, which ends the growth from that stem in that direction. So this leaf has actually got 5 leaflets, and we have an end leaflet and we have 2 pairs of leaflets which are opposite one another. This shrub is elder. It has beautiful white flowers in May, and then it goes on to bear berries which become black, and very tasty they are too. Just 2 or 3 pairs of leaflets and you know you've got elder. If you have more than 3 pairs of leaflets, and here we have a plant, here's the leaf, and there's at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pairs of leaflets there, and then leaflets. So if you have that many pairs of leaflets in the leaf, then you have ash. And you also recognize ash later in the season by the keys, which are the winged seeds. So those are the only 2 species of bush or tree which you will find growing in Leicestershire hedges. So now we're going to go on to species which have no pinnate leaves, they're just simple leaves, and in this case, the leaves will have smooth edges and they will be growing alternately along the stem. Now, so here we have 1 simple leaf. This is a branch which is going to carry on growing in this direction. There's the bud. So this is a leaf, and it has a smooth edge to it, not toothed, not lobed. And the leaves are growing alternately, 1 each side of the stem. Now this is a beech, and as you can see at this time of the season, later in the season, it grows beech nuts in a bristly shell. Another nice picture of beech. Incidentally, all the pictures that I'm using, nearly all the pictures in this presentation, are available to you on the Nature Spot website. And
so can I just jump in just to let people know that you've put all of this information together in a really useful, handy key, and we will send that out to everybody that wants it after the event. So if you're worried about trying to remember all of this, just be reassured that you will get the key if you want it, which summarizes all of these really fantastic, useful tips.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, the key, I will show you the key later on. I'm just going to say that although these leaves are smooth, they don't have teeth, they are wavy edged sometimes, and they are hairy or ciliate along the edges. But you'll see what I mean by toothed later on. Okay, those leaves were alternate along the stem. These leaves, they still have smooth edges. They're simple leaves, but they are arranged opposite one another up the stem. And these are quite broad leaves. These are more than 3 centimeters wide. And they are leaves of dogwood. A shrub never becomes a tree, but quite an upright size of shrub. And with the native dogwood, there are never more than 4 pairs of secondary veins on a leaf. This vein is the primary vein, and these that branch from it are the secondary veins. And you can count them there. You could say there's 1, 2, 3 pairs of secondary veins. You might just say that was a 4th right along the edge. There is an alien species which is often introduced into hedges. This is the red osier dogwood, but with this species you'll see there are more than 4 pairs of secondary veins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on this particular one. So you can use that to tell the difference between a native and an alien. Still with opposite leaves, and they've still got smooth edges, but they're smaller, less than 3 centimeters wide. And now we have the beautiful wild privet, and mostly with this species, the leaves are more than twice as long as they are wide. That would be about 1, 2, that'd be about 3 times as long as wide. There is an introduced privet, which I expect everybody knows, garden privet, but usually with this one, the leaves are less than 2 times as long as wide. They're more egg-shaped, ovoid. So
sorry, Rosanna.
Yeah.
Rosanna, you've got your hand up. Did you want to jump in?
Sorry, I know this session's for everyone else, but I don't know if it might be a question that might come up. I was just wondering, so where do we define the difference between a shrub and a tree? Now, that might seem obvious to a lot of people, but I'm thinking you did say, for example, previously, ash. We know ash develops into a tree and it can be found in hedgerows as well. But then when we were talking about dogwood, we were saying that that will never actually fully go into a tree. So I just wondered, for the benefit of anyone watching who might be completely new to that, where the line is between those two definitions.
Well, actually, I don't think it matters, because these will tell you the species, and it's very difficult because in a hedgerow, generally the hedgerow is cut, and it's really difficult to tell which ones are going to be trees and which ones aren't. So I don't think we need to worry too much, but you could say more than 5 meters.
Brilliant.
Tree. I mean, that's just a rather subjective
rough definition. Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's great. Thank you for that, Russell.
Okay.
Just in case anyone asks me.
Yeah. So now we're still on simple leaves. They're not pinnate, but now instead of having that smooth edge, they're going to be deeply lobed leaves. This is a lobe of a leaf. Another lobe here, and another lobe. All these leaves are deeply lobed. And in this shrub, not a tree, in this shrub, the leaves are arranged oppositely again. There is one other important and useful thing with this shrub, and that is the leaf stalk, the stalk of the leaf, this little bit here, which is magnified and shows here. It has a small channel in it, and near the apex, where it joins onto the leaf lamina itself, it has some small glands, little spots growing. They're not a disease, they are part of the plant. And if you see all that, then you have gelderose. This shrub produces some beautiful orangey red fruits in the autumn, which the birds absolutely adore. And also, there is a caterpillar, which David, I'm sure, will be able to name, which really likes the leaves. And you will find sometimes this shrub with just skeleton leaves and nothing else.
It's actually a beetle larva.
Oh, beetle larva. Thank you very much, David. Still the same deeply lobed leaves and still opposite, but in this case, the leaf stalk or petiole is not channeled, it is round. You can just about make that out in this photograph, though it's not very clear, but it doesn't have a channel. And the leaf lobes in this one are acute. They come to a point, and this, as you can see from the seeds here, the winged seeds, this is sycamore. That's sycamore later in the summer. This is sycamore about now. It's flowering now. Now, still with these deeply lobed leaves opposite and around the stalk, but the lobes now much blunter, much more blunt, and this is field maple. The leaves also, there are other different characters, aren't there? But that's perhaps the easiest one. Generally speaking, they're smaller than the sycamore leaves as well. And this is quite interesting, isn't it? The fruits are more horizontally arranged than those on the sycamore. Okay, now we've got simple leaves again, but still with the deep lobes, but now they're not opposite, they're arranged alternately up the stem. And in this species, the twigs are thorny. You'll find lots of little thorns on the twigs. And this is hawthorn. This is the flowers, which are now just beginning to open. This is later in the year again. Deep lobes on the leaves, which are alternately arranged up the stem. Now, I've got a picture of the flower because this flower on the bush or tree, could be either, which we call hawthorn. These flowers have just a single stigma in the center of the flower, the very center, the female part of the flower, just one stigma. There is a very closely related species which has two stigmas. One, two. And that is, if you have a bush which is just flowers like that, all of them with two stigmas, you have the Midland hawthorn. It tends to have slightly less deeply lobed leaves and they're a bit shinier. But this is the key, the two stigmas. And they will show, even when it's in fruit, I know it's difficult in this photograph, in just about making out there just a single stigma. With the Midland hawthorn fruits, there will be two. So if the leaves are simple, still deeply lobed, but they're and still alternate, but the twigs don't have any prickles or spines on them, then you've got an oak. I don't think there's anything else to say about that. Okay, so we're moving on now to simple leaves that have teeth on the edges, but they're not deeply lobed. And we're going to start with those that are arranged opposite. And in this species, the leaf has a heart-shaped or cordate base. You can see one there. It goes in, and then there's two lobes at the base of the leaf. A heart-shaped or cordate leaf. It's simple. It's got teeth around the edge, but not deeply lobed. The leaves are arranged in an opposite fashion. You can see that there. And they have a heart-shaped base. So this is the wayfaring tree. This is a little less common in Leicestershire. It becomes more common as you move to the east of the county. If the leaves are toothed and opposite, but the leaf base tapers into the stalk of the leaf, then you have spindle, which has these beautiful fruits. Again, this is not at all a common species, but it needs to be included because you get very excited when you see this in a hedgerow. Okay, still with toothed edges and opposite leaves, but in this case with the secondary veins of the leaf curving inwards away from the edge and towards the apex. Then you have buckthorn. The teeth are quite small, but they're still definitely clear there. And these fruits will become black in the autumn. And now we move on to alternate leaved, toothed, alternate leaves up the stem, still toothed, but they've got spiny teeth. Well, you know what that is anyway, holly, but it's got to be included. It's fairly common, a fairly common hedge species. And alternate leaves that are toothed, but if the leaves have lopsided bases, one side of the base is larger and overlapping the petiole, and the other is smaller and doesn't overlap the petiole. That's a beautiful, easy to see feature there. Now, if those leaves are bristly, they tend to be rather rough on the upper surface, then you have elm. Poor thing, now gets attacked as soon as it starts to become a tree. Used to be a beautiful tree in the county, but now it's always attacked before it gets to tree size. But it's very common as a bush within the hedges. The other ones which have lopsided bases to the leaves, but they're much smoother and shinier on the upper surface, and that's the lime. And here we've got the fruits coming. Lime has this typical bract, which goes along the stalk, grows along the stalk of the fruit. Okay. Still with our toothed leaves, still they're alternate, but now the branches of this species have actually spines. And you can see they're alternate, and but the leaves are toothed as before. And this has sloes, blackberries in the autumn. This is the blackthorn. White flowers have more or less finished now for this year. But magnificent spines, magnificent. Okay. And toothed leaves still alternate, but the secondary veins of these end in the teeth, much more straight, and they go directly out. Each vein goes out to the tip of the leaf and into the tooth. And that is hazel. Hazel, rather good because it's got these, you may need a lens, but it's got these wonderful glandular hairs, red-tipped glandular hairs growing up the leaf stalk, the petiole. And still with the toothed edges and alternate, but now with the secondary veins curving away from the leaf edges. If you can see what I mean, instead of going directly into the tooth, the veins curve away and break up before they reach the edge. And in this species, the scales that cover the buds are just, the whole bud is covered by one single scale. I'll show you a bit more about that later. This is willow. Here's another kind of willow. Again, the veins break up before they reach the edge of the leaf. Alternate leaves, toothed. These are still described as teeth, although they're not as sharp as the others, but they are still described as teeth. We have two willows here, common willows. The one with the broad leaves is goat willow, egg-shaped leaves, and the one with the long pointed leaf is the hybrid crack willow. There are others, but those are the main ones which you're going to find. And here is a little description about the bud scales, which sorry, that'll be in a minute. Here again, we have the secondary veins curving away from the leaf edges, but here there are more than one bud scale. And this is a species which you'll probably recognize immediately. It's an apple. May be a crab apple, may not be a crab apple, but it's an apple. These beautiful big white flower, rosy tinted white flowers in the spring. And I'll just go on to show you about this bud scale business because I think it does help. This is a picture of the willow, and you'll see that there's a continuous structure here, which when it's peeled off, it looks like this. It's a single scale that encases the whole of the bud. Whereas with the apple, these bud scales, there are many. There's one even dropped off there, one there. Oh, I'm sorry, I've clicked it and I need to go back now. I'm not sure how to do that. No, let's go back. Here we are. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 more, 5, 6. You can see there many bud scales. So that's a big distinguishing thing between those two genera. Okay, now that's the end of the woody trees and shrubs which will be growing in your hedge. But I need to talk to you a little bit about the plants which use those woody shrubs to climb up to support them. And I'm going to start with woody plants. Nevertheless, they need the support of the hedge. And the first ones are plants with very major prickles up the stem. You all know what this is. It has pinnate leaves. This one has leaflets, one pair, two pairs of leaflets, and then leaflets. And it has stems with very stout prickles. This is dog rose. There is another rose, but the stems and the prickles are much more slender. And this is the field rose. There's one other feature that I need to show you, which does help to distinguish between the two. The field rose has the styles, the centre, the female part of the flower, fused into a column. You can just about make it out on that hip there, that little black protruding column. So that's the field rose feature as well, whereas the dog rose doesn't have a column. It just has a lot of styles around on the central mound. So that's what I meant by the styles being fused or not fused. So field rose, dog rose. Slim, fine prickles, thick, butch prickles. And another woody plant which has stems with prickles, but the leaves are quite different. They're arranged palmately like the fingers of a hand coming from a central point. Again, I expect most people recognise this straight away, the bramble. Stems of woody plants without prickles, well, we have some that have adventitious rootlets. And what that means is that there are little rootlets growing all the way up the stem here, and they help the plant grip on to whatever it is it chooses to grow up. You know what this is? Common ivy. And then another way that climbing plants can climb is they can twine around the stems of other plants, or even themselves, just to give them support. And again, you probably know what this is. This is honeysuckle, a woody plant with twining stems. Other climbing plants within the hedge are herbaceous. They die back completely over the winter and then regrow from the ground in the spring. If they have latex, then, if they have latex, latex is a sap which, if you break a leaf if you tear off a leaf, little white juice comes from where you've broken the leaf off. We call that latex. So if it has latex, this is bindweed. This is it twines up and climbs up through the hedge. And if the bracts of the flower, there's a bud, and you can see the bracts, here's an actual open flower. If these bracts overlap, then you have large bindweed, which is a bit of an invasive thug. But if the bracts do not overlap, as here you can see the calyx in between the bracts, then you have hedge bindweed, which is a native plant. And if you have a herbaceous perennial without latex, you have this lovely thing, blackberry. Here, the veins of the leaf are arranged palmately, all coming from one point. another herbaceous perennial, but one which climbs using these wonderful springy tendrils, is white bryony. Those are distinctive, that couldn't be anything else. So that's all the species that you've got to get to know. And this is my little diagram, which I hope will really make it much easier for you to remember what I've just shown you. You start with this chart. You start with the left-hand column. You, first of all, just as I've done with the talk, you decide whether you've got a tree or shrub or a climber. You can, if it's got pinnate leaves, then if that was that first and second slide, you can find those there. If the leaf edges of your tree or shrub, the leaves are simple. If the edges are smooth, then you can work your way through those species. If the edges are deeply lobed, you've got the opposite leaves, the alternate leaves, you can work your way through until you come to the species, and so on. And the same thing with the climbers: woody, herbaceous, prickly stem, smooth stem, latex, no latex, and so on. You can work your way through until you come. So this chart is, I hope, an easy, quick way of helping you find all those species which I've shown you tonight. Okay, the hedgerows are absolutely vital for our county's biodiversity. Thank you so much for being interested in them and offering to have a look at them and perhaps record some of them. As has already been mentioned, there is a survey coming up, I think, Dave, on the 15th of this month, which you'll be very welcome to attend, and we'll try and find as many of those species as we can. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Russell. Do you want to stop sharing?
I'm going to press the button. Yes.
Well done. And I'll take over at this point. So what I want to do now is just give you a little bit of information about hedge management and how they can be maximised to benefit biodiversity. I mean, it's interesting just to reflect on what is a hedge. It can be different things to different people. Historically, it's often been used as a boundary marker. Today, you sometimes find some of the oldest hedges mark parish boundaries. As we know, and quite commonly in farm situations, it's used as a stock-proof barrier. In perhaps more amenity situations, it can be just a visual screen. And of course, what we're really interested in is its benefit for wildlife. I'm not sure what category the picture on the bottom left would fall into. None of those, I think.
Dragon hedge.
So let's just briefly think about the ecology of a hedge. First of all, it's worth reflecting that it's really completely artificial. It's only maintained by humans. It's a temporary state of affair. And effectively, it's a row of small trees or shrubs, should I say. And we'll see what happens in a minute if you stop managing it. But in terms of wildlife, it's a kind of habitat that reflects what you would find at the edge of a woodland. It's where these trees or shrubs meet the light. And so they're providing shade, shelter, nesting opportunities, feeding opportunities, and safety, of course. And crucially, and this is one of the most important benefits really of hedges, is that they provide habitat connectivity. And for many species, they're vital in terms of allowing them to move around from, say, woodland to woodland without having to travel across an exposed arable field, for example. So as I'm sure you're aware, they do play a really important part for wildlife. So what happens if hedgerows are not managed? Well, they can go really one of two ways. If they are in an area where there's grazing or animals particularly, then you tend to get what's shown in the top picture. Basically, you can see there the row of trees emerging. Everything at a lower level gets eaten away, and as the trees grow, they shade out the ground beneath. But if there isn't so much grazing, then what often happens is the hedge starts to morph into a kind of mini linear woodland. It spreads out sideways as well as growing upwards. And these can be really valuable for wildlife, but of course takes up more land and isn't always encouraged by farmers. And if a hedge is over-managed, the other end of the equation, then you can end up really with, the worst of all things, really, that doesn't provide any real benefit at all. It's not a barrier. It's certainly not offering anything really to wildlife. It's severely over-managed, and sadly, we do see a lot of hedges that do look like that. So in terms of management, traditionally, hedges are laid. And this is something that still happens, but it's been increasingly replaced by using mechanical flailing. Basically, this is a cutter that's held on a tractor, and it basically just chops everything that it meets. A bit like a mower for hedges, really. But just briefly look at hedge laying, this ancient craft. You can go on courses to learn how to do it, and it is quite good fun. It seems a bit brutal because you have to, first of all, clear back some of the side growth so you can get to the stem of the trees or the shrubs, and then basically you cut nearly all the way through them so you can bend them over. You just leave a little connection so that the upper parts of the tree can still communicate with its roots, and that is enough to keep it alive. And then they're bent over, they're held in place by stakes, and then there's a binding woven into the top. Sometimes the material you've cut off is used to supplement the barrier whilst the new growth arrives. And both from the areas that you've cut at the base, but also from the slanting woody areas, you will get new growth, and it's a really effective way of keeping the hedge both healthy but thick and dense and stock-proof. So if you want to manage a hedge for wildlife, there's a few things to bear in mind. Ideally, it would be A-shaped, this kind of triangular shape, so it's wider at the base than at the top. One of the benefits of that is that it makes it better able to withstand weather, snow, for example, but also it allows light to get to a bigger part of the hedge, and light is often important both for the tree to grow, for photosynthesis from the leaf, but also for it to produce its fruit and ultimately the berries. So both the flowers and the berries are important for wildlife in providing nectar and food later in the year. As a general rule, the bigger it is, the better, providing it's got a decent shape. And to achieve that, it's often, it is ideal to only trim a hedge every 2 or even 3 years, because this allows flowering and fruiting. Some species will only fruit on the 2nd year's growth. So if a hedge that is trimmed every year never reaches that point, and so it is never able to provide those benefits. And even a hedge that is flailed should really be coppiced or laid every 20 years. Coppicing is a simpler intervention than laying. Basically, you just chop everything off at the ground, and the tree will re-sprout from the ground. It's a more brutal way of managing it, but it's actually a very effective way. It does mean that you have to provide temporary fencing or a barrier if you want the hedge to carry on doing its job whilst it regrows. So what does a really good wildlife hedge look like? So I borrowed these from the website of the People's Trust for Endangered Species, who have produced a really useful, simple survey, which we're just going to call on. And this is freely available on their website. So the first thing to look for in a healthy hedge is that it has standard trees emerging with a canopy above the height of the tree. These are effectively separate habitats really to the hedge, but they certainly enhance the overall effect. Secondly, you want as many different shrubs or trees in your hedge as possible. There are many insects, for example, that are specialists and they will only live on a certain type of trees or shrub species. They only eat one kind of leaf. So if you've got a whole range of different species in there, you're going to support a wider range of wildlife. And then we've already mentioned this really, but just to stress it, the height and the width are important. You want this A shape. So you want a hedge that's at least 2 meters high, and ideally you want it to be a similar width. You also want it to be structurally complex, which means there are lots of different micro habitats within it. There are denser areas, there are slightly lighter areas, there's different types of vegetation growing at different parts of the hedge. It just provides more opportunities. We've already mentioned connectivity, so it's, you know, a hedge on its own is useful, but it's really valuable if it connects to other hedges, or ideally, ultimately, to other sites of wildlife interest, woodland, for example, or meadows or whatever. The edge of the hedge is also making a big contribution. So this isn't the woody part, this is the kind of the herbs that are growing alongside the hedge. So ideally, if you were managing a hedge, you would leave a meter or a 2 meter strip either side of the hedge for these kind of meadow grassland species to grow. And many of them will be shade tolerant species. As we said, it's a kind of similar habitat to that you'd find on the woodland edge. So you can find, you know, bluebells and other woodland species growing in the shade of a hedge. And then finally, the density. You ideally don't really want to be able to see through the hedge. If you can see through it, particularly at the base, it's not providing really useful cover for wildlife, and it doesn't provide that kind of corridor effect. So I mentioned the surveys that have been promoted on the website. There is an older survey technique that you may have come across, which is quite commonly spoken about as a way of aging a hedge. And this it's called the Hooper law. You measure out a 30 meter length, and you can pace it out. You don't have to measure it with a tape measure. And then you count the number of woody species, excluding the climbers, and then repeat it every 30 meter length. And as an approximate guide, the age of the hedge in centuries relates, is equivalent to the average number of species in each 30 meter length. It's not precise, but it gives you a guide. And so as a general rule, the more diverse the hedge, the longer it's been around. And the reason this rule applies is because over time, new species colonize the hedge. You know, birds bring in seeds from other species in their droppings, for example, and they will grow. But it's a slow process. So one species is added approximately every 100 years. So yes, the PTS hedge survey is a simpler version than the official government DEFRA standard. You can download it as an app, or you can do it as a paper exercise. And depending on what you fill in, it will then give you tailored management advice for that hedge. I think it's particularly designed for landowners and farmers, but just for somebody that's interested in wildlife, it's an interesting exercise to be able to understand how valuable any given hedge is for wildlife. And it does indeed include the 30 meter count. Rosanna, did you want to jump in?
Just going to add on that briefly, David, I've actually used, so the Healthy Hedgerow survey is one of the newer ones. So there is 2 hedgerow surveys online, specifically on the PTS website. But this one's really, really nice to use, actually. As you said, you just download it on your phone, and it's a rapid assessment, really. So it tells you if a hedge is undermanaged, overmanaged, and it's got a number of diagrams and illustrations.
Well, I'm just coming to that.
Are you? Okay, I'll leave you to it.
Yeah, so just to follow on from that, so just to quickly summarize, it categorizes hedges into 12 different categories, but in 4 main bands. So first of all, the first 3 are the kind of neglected or overmanaged hedges. So the first one is the equivalent to that picture I showed earlier, where a hedge has just been managed to within an inch of its life, and there's not much of a hedge left. It's just a basic, some kind of stumpy shrubs. it may not have quite got that bad. So you can see in these drawings, they progressively less worse as you go through them, but they all have this big gap underneath. So they're not providing a lot of cover. But you may be finding a hedge that has recently been managed, a rejuvenated hedge. So it might be laid, as we talked about, coppice, which I mentioned, where it's been cut off at the base, or indeed it may have just been planted. Or it could be a combination of the two, because often when you're rejuvenating a hedge, it will have gaps in it, and you will plant those gaps with new plants. And then the other 6, the next category on the left here, these are the healthier hedges, the ones that are doing a good job for wildlife. As you go through them, they're starting to get a little neglected. So you can see on the bottom one, H7, there's a gap forming at the bottom. And then as we move over to the right, they're basically just been unmanaged for some time, and they've grown very tall. They're starting to spread the canopy, which is shading out everything beneath. And so in the bottom one, basically, you've got a row of trees. And then finally on the website, which is quite useful, it gives you a flow diagram as to how a hedge could be managed depending on its status. And if you use the app or the paper-based survey, it will then guide you to these. But it's quite useful just to look at it and work it out yourself. So when we meet up, for those that are joining us on the 15th, we'll look at this, and as we go through the hedges and hopefully identify as many species as we can also reflect on how valuable they are for wildlife, and think about the kind of management that could apply to make them better for wildlife. So thanks to Russell for that excellent presentation and for your introduction, Rosanna, and we look forward to meeting you on the 15th. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for a great job. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Is recording finished?